Next on Outlook, American Dani Rotstein had just touched down in the Spanish island of Mallorca looking to start a new life. He thought he'd struggle to find other Jewish people, but one local corrected him.
She said, well, there's, Ashkenazim, and then there are also Sephardi. There are many Israeli families. And then she said, and of course you have the Chuetas, and I'd never heard that word before.
How that word led him to a hidden piece of history after the news.
BBC News with Jerry Smith. The British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's tabled constructive and reasonable proposals to the European Union on Britain's planned withdrawal at the end of the month. Speaking at the Conservative Party conference, Mr Johnson gave few details, but said there'd be no customs checks at or near the border between Ireland and Northern Ireland, a sticking point in negotiations. A hearing has begun at which lawyers for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will have a chance to argue he shouldn't face corruption charges. The Attorney General has already said he intends to indict Mr Netanyahu on bribery, fraud and breach of trust allegations. The Iranian President Hassan Rouhani says a French plan for negotiations between his country and the US is broadly acceptable. President Macron of France has been trying to arrange talks that would ease the current acute tensions between the two sides. French police are staging what they call a national march of anger in Paris in a protest against rising rates of suicide in the force. Unions say there have been over 50 police suicides since the start of the year. The Liberian President George Weah says he's against the idea of a special court being set up to investigate war crimes committed during the country's civil war, as well as economic crimes. Mr Weah said developing the country was a bigger priority. The US has introduced new regulations to restrict the import of goods made by forced labour. The countries affected are Brazil, China, Malaysia, Zimbabwe and the Democratic Republic of Congo. An 18th century Ethiopian crown is to be returned from the Netherlands 2 decades after it was found in a suitcase by a former refugee. Sirach Asfau said he didn't feel it would be safe to return the ornate crown until recently due to the political situation there. BBC News.
Hi, I'm Emily Webb and you're with Outlook, taking you on a tour of the world one extraordinary story at a time. In a moment we'll be meeting a man who helped to shape history in China, but first an insight into a long-forgotten religious community. When he hit 34, Dani Rotstein decided to pick up his life and move it across the Atlantic to the city of Palma on the Spanish island of Mallorca.
I was producing TV commercials, living in New York City, and I wasn't very happy living in New York, and I felt like I just needed a change. I needed to get out of New York and go someplace different, and there was a part of me that always wanted to go back to Spain because I'd studied abroad there when I was a junior in college in Madrid.
What did you love about it as a country?
I think I just loved the culture, the vibe, the fact that people seem to not obsess or stress over work so much. It was more about food. You know, here in Spain they have something called the siesta, where they take about 2 hours in the middle of the day to really sit down and eat and drink wine. I think I really just fell in love with the culture when I was studying abroad there, everything about it.
So you touched down in Palma. What sort of a place is it? Can you describe it to me?
It has beautiful beaches, beautiful mountains, tons of palm trees, but it also has these gorgeous old medieval towns that are sprinkled throughout the island that you really do feel like you're stepping back into time when you walk down these tiny streets.
And this lifestyle of siestas and cobbled streets was a little different to the place where Dani spent his childhood, in a Jewish household in New Jersey in the US.
I grew up in a very close-knit family. My father's from Netanya, Israel, originally, and my mother is from Westchester, New York. She is the daughter of Jewish refugees that escaped from Germany in the Holocaust. And my mother worked for many years as a Hebrew school principal. So, you know, growing up, we celebrated all the holidays. We actually kept kosher in the home. We had separate dishes for meat and dairy. We didn't go to services quite a bit or to the synagogue, but every Friday night we would sit down and have dinner together as a family. And yeah, it was always a fun thing growing up.
And you had no expectation that there was any Jewish community in Parma, but then you found out that there was a synagogue.
Yes, I basically totally serendipitously was in Barcelona at the synagogue there and happened to be at the same service that the president of the Mallorca Jewish community was there as well. And she began to explain this, rather incredible story that I'd never heard about.
So tell me, what did she tell you?
So I asked her who makes up this Mallorcan Jewish community, and she said, well, there's, Ashkenazi, and then there are also Sephardi. There are many Israeli families. And then she said, and of course you have the Chuetas, and I'd never heard that word before.
Chuetas. It was a word Dani was about to become very familiar with. And how did she describe the Chuetas to you?
She said that the Chuetas are local, native Mallorquins, people that have been living here for centuries, that are Catholic, but that are descendants of the old medieval Jews that once populated Mallorca.
How surprised were you to hear about that?
I was shocked, Emily, to be honest, because I just said, I grew up in a fairly Jewish educational home where we learned a lot. I'd lived in Madrid for a year, but I'd never heard of this term Chueta.
What did you find out about the Chuetas and what exactly had happened to them historically?
Basically, what I found out, in addition to reading what was online and reading a couple books that they recommended, that there were Jews in the Balearic Islands since the 5th century. And then in 1435, there was a massive conversion where the entire Jewish community was forcibly converted to Catholicism. It was either convert or death. They were really just doing it to save themselves. So they actually were practicing Judaism in secret, some of them, not all of them, while trying to show that they were good Catholics on the outside.
These efforts were stepped up during the Spanish Inquisition. This was when the country's Catholic monarchs decided to persecute anyone who they didn't believe were true followers of the Catholic faith.
And then I learned of this terrible event that happened in 1691. There was an escape that was attempted out of a boat, and the Inquisition caught these 30, 40 Jews. And then there was a public execution, and 37 of them were killed. 3 of them actually were burned alive because they did not want to give up their Judaism publicly. And hearing that story just really gave me the chills.
So you decided to go to the synagogue. What was it like, and how different was it to the synagogues that you were used to going to?
When I first got there and we were doing the prayers, we suddenly skipped over one of the prayers. And normally you do that, Emily, when you don't have 10 Jewish men in an Orthodox shul. But I looked around the men's section and I counted 14 men. And I was very confused why we would be skipping as if we don't have that. And I asked the guy next to me, why are we skipping? And he very plainly told me, oh, not everyone here is Jewish. Some of them are Chuetas. And I couldn't wrap my head around that. And so then I found out that they would come to services, but they wouldn't be counted.
This was the first indication for Dani of how Chuetas are viewed. The aftershocks of keeping their Judaism under wraps for so many years are still being felt. Some don't want to be seen as Jewish, some do. But some, until recently, didn't even know that their heritage was Jewish.
Bueno, me llamo Miquel Segura Aguilar.
This is Miguel Segura. He was born on the island and grew up there in the 1950s and 60s. He always got the sense his family was viewed differently, but never really understood why. And the word Chueta was bandied around a lot.
In school, you would be insulted and mistreated and even beaten. I didn't understand what it meant. I thought that maybe we were a special kind of people. But then one day, during a Catholic procession, when I was a child, we were pointed at and they were saying, "Those are the ones that killed Jesus." That's when I made the first association between being Chueta and something that was taken as negative. When I was a child, I kept insisting to my father, asking him what Chueta meant, asking about our history. When he finally told me, he said, "We are descendants from the Hebrews." He didn't have the courage even to say Jew. The topic was a taboo even at home within our family. We grew up with this sort of schizophrenia around our Chueta history. Outside we were Chuetas, but in our home we could not even mention the subject.
Were there traditions in your family that were unique or different maybe to non-Chueta families around you?
For example, my father had one knife for the cheese and another one for the meat, and he would get very upset if they changed those knives or swapped them around. These customs had been passed across generations, but we did not know what they meant. At one point, I decided it was enough. I decided to break all the barriers and taboos and find out more about my history.
He then went off and did his own research. For him, it was transformative.
The first thing I realized was that I was a victim, that I was part of this huge lie. I was never ashamed to realize that I was part of this minority. I actually always felt proud to be a Chueta. I started to own it and accept it in a positive way.
And you then started writing about Chueta history yourself, and some people tried to stop you, some people from the community.
In 1994, I was a journalist and I'd already written a few books. My editor suggested that I write a book with interviews with Chuetas. But when the rumor got out, a lot of Chuetas came to see me. They were asking me why after such a long time now things were finally being forgotten, why would I want to bring it back to life? Even a priest in the north of Mallorca made a campaign against me and my family before the book was published. I had to be placed under police protection for a month and a half, and our family shop was attacked several times.
It's such an extreme reaction. Were you surprised by how people reacted?
Yes, I was very surprised. I knew it was a taboo, but I never thought it would be such a big thing. I thought there would be a different mindset towards it. But it wasn't like that. I was mistaken. Even in the 90s, it was very controversial to talk about this.
All this writing and research brought Miguel to a conclusion. The day that you did convert to Judaism, Miguel, how important was that for you?
At the beginning, I didn't want to convert. I felt I couldn't convert into something I already was. I had a conversation with the chief rabbi from Jerusalem, and he told me that if I wanted to see if I was Jewish, I should go to the main plaza in my town, and that I would know within 10 minutes that I was Jewish by sitting and talking with the people there. In the end, I accepted it, and I did what I call the return in New York. I felt immediately lighter. I lost the weight that I had been carrying around for a long time, like if someone had cleaned me inside out, that something that had been bothering me for a long time had been taken away.
So by the time Dani arrived on the island, Miguel was a big character in the local synagogue. He was also throwing some pretty good Shabbat dinners.
After going to services a couple times and little by little speaking with Mikkel, at one point he turned to me and said, "What are you doing now for Friday night dinner?" I said, "No, I have no plans." He said, "Why don't you come with us? The Rav is in town. The rabbi is here." So I went, and I can't tell you how warm and welcoming the vibe was. Sharing stories about growing up in the United States and sharing some songs I learned in Jewish Sleepaway Summer Camp, and those Friday night dinners were really beautiful.
Miguel, what were your first impressions of Dani?
I was already part of the community for a long time when Dani started joining us. He was a young, very creative person that started to bring a lot of new rhythms and songs to the group.
And from there, a new partnership began. There are approximately 20,000 Chuetas living in Mallorca. Miguel's writing had done a lot to raise awareness, but he and Dani wanted to shake things up for the Chuetas and other Jewish people on the island.
I think Mikkel and I joined forces when it didn't feel like the community was really moving in the right direction. There were fewer people coming. It didn't seem to have a bright future. And so Mikkel and I started to doing activities together. We did cultural events. We did dinners, like I said. I kind of always wanted to share my Jewish culture with other people. I believe it was in January of 2017 where Mikkel and I organized a Shabbaton, like a weekend of Jewish culture. And it wasn't about prayer and going to synagogue. Over 150 people came out to spend a day learning and sharing and connecting about Jewish culture, history, art, music. That has to be the best moment when, at the end of that day, you look around and you see so many people that were so excited to be a part of something like that.
So have you noticed a real change in the community?
I have. The most important thing I feel that we have achieved together is this opening up of the Jewish community. Before, it was very closed, very hard to find out information about it, very hard to visit it and get close to it. I believe in my own way, I've opened it up to other young, recently moved to Mallorca, Jewish families. And then I think with Mikkel, similar thing with other Chuetas trying to be interested.
How significant has your Jewish identity become to you, Mikkel?
It was vital because I feel that I really am where I always should have been. I am where I belong, where I wish all my family had acknowledged to belong. I always knew deep inside that someone had taken away from me my God, my language, my identity. So since then, I really feel that I've gone back to where I always should have been.
That was Miguel Segura and Dani Rotstein talking to me from Palma in Mallorca. You're with Outlook from the BBC World Service. You can reach us by email, outlook@bbc.com, or post on our Facebook page, which is where many of you have been commenting on the interview I did with Rachel DeLoach Williams. Rachel's someone who fell victim to a woman known as New York's fake heiress, Anna Sorokin. Regina Wangari wrote, "This story seems unbelievable. How could someone be so deceitful?" Rachel came across Anna in 2016. At the time, she was working for Vanity Fair magazine in New York, and she'd heard about this glamorous German woman who was launching a business in the city.
My first meeting with Anna happened at a lounge on the Lower East Side of Manhattan called Happy Ending, of all things. And at the time, I had seen her in photos on Instagram with some girls that I knew through the magazine and fashion world. But aside from that, I didn't know much about her. And I was looking forward to meeting her because all of a sudden she was in these photos with people I knew and liked.
And what were your first impressions?
Probably the first thing was the way she spoke. She had an accent that was, I guess it was German, but it was a little bit hard to place. And she seemed nice and easy to talk to.
From there, the friendship blossomed. Anna invited Rachel out to luxury restaurants and always picked up the bill. But it was on an all-expenses-paid trip to Morocco that the real Anna started to appear. She claimed that she was having credit card issues, and Rachel ended up having to cover the flights and hotel. It came to over $60,000, more than she made in a year. And it looked like Anna had no intention of paying her back.
It wasn't like she just disappeared either. She kept in touch with me every day with a host of excuses for over 2 months, which were by far the hardest 2 months of my life, trying to figure out what was happening. And I started to have panic attacks. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. My hair was falling out.
Their story ended in court but caught the attention of media outlets all over the world. Sue Eisel-Baumann heard the interview as she was driving home and wrote, "Sat in my car in my garage listening to the end." But Lawrence Beckles commented, "There is no free lunch. You trusted Anna to your own detriment because you perceived her to be rich. You've learnt your lesson that not all that glitters is gold." If you want to listen to Rachel's interview, it's called Scammed by My Friend, the Fake Heiress, and you can find it on our website. Just search for BBC Outlook. Now, all this week, Witness History is marking 70 years since the birth of the People's Republic of China. Today, we're looking at China's Cultural Revolution, which the communist leader Mao Zedong declared in 1966. As a result, millions of young Chinese responded to the leader's call and joined the Red Guard. In 2016, Lucy Burns spoke to one man who took part in this radical and brutal attempt to reshape Chinese history.
Since our birth, we received all the teaching that he was a great leader. We thought he was a god.
Saul Young was 20 when the Cultural Revolution started and devoted to Chairman Mao.
He liberated the whole country, all people. He rescued the poor peasant. I was totally pour my energy, even my life, into it to support whatever Mao asked me to do.
Mao had decided to mobilize the young people as the driving force of a vast campaign to purify the Communist Party. Mao called them his Red Guards. There was to be a new revolution, a cultural revolution, a revolution in people's thinking. Its purpose was to root out all the old-fashioned ideas and habits which Mao believed could be used to block progress towards communism.
Of course, I joined. It's glorious to join. Only the good class background can join this Red Guard. Good class, worker, peasant, revolutionary people. Bad class means bourgeois or landlord, anti-revolutionary background.
The Red Guards weren't officially set up by Mao, but by students in Beijing keen to prove their devotion to the Communist Revolution. But the movement soon spread across the whole country. Students and school pupils started wearing red armbands to show their allegiance. They were even invited to Beijing to take part in huge rallies in front of Mao himself.
We woke up very early morning in the middle of the night to wait in the side street, to wait there for the whole night. But we're patient because in the morning we are going to walk through Tiananmen Square to see our great leader. Mao was there with his comrades. The whole life, you try to contribute to the country, you try to contribute to the supreme leader. And now the leader will see us, and encourage us.
But aside from showing off their revolutionary fervour, it wasn't immediately clear what the Red Guards were meant to do.
The Red Guard movement, there is no clear instruction, what should you do? We just realized by ourselves, because living there for such a long time and since childhood, you know that always in communist China, they keep talking about trying to destroy the old culture, Confucianism. So in the beginning, all Red Guard, all students chose those targets to express their loyalty to the party.
The Red Guards carried out a reign of terror against anyone they thought was backward or decadent. They went into houses and smashed up the furniture. They smashed up shops that sold cosmetics. They cut people's hair if they thought it was too long.
They started with a campaign against the four olds: old habits, old ideas, old tradition and old culture, anything old they could find.
If you have any relics from the old time, any furniture, you feel that it's not modern, not simple, we felt that it's old. And if we find some clothes too beautiful, too colorful, you think that it's old. It's according to interpretation of this Red Guard, these young people. There is no definition.
The main targets of the Four Olds campaign were the landlords, formerly rich elites.
But they were not rich at that time. They were rich before 1949. And we thought, go to their home, we still can find for all. In my memory, the family, they were scared. They submit to us. They whatever you want to take, you take it. So they did not resist.
For Red Guards like Saul, the movement was exhilarating. Suddenly, it felt like they were in charge. They could travel all over the country, and everyone had to do as they said. They started running struggle sessions, targeting people who were not behaving correctly by subjecting them to public humiliation to make them see the error of their ways. Local Red Guards organised struggle sessions all over China, attacking fellow students or local officials, shouting at them, sometimes going as far as physical violence.
I took part to participate, only sitting there, shout the slogan, why you do this and why you do that, you should admit your mistakes, confess, So that kind of thing. But never went up to physical hurt him.
Some of the prime targets of the Red Guard struggle sessions were their teachers. In classrooms and lecture halls all over China, teachers were abused and insulted by their students, forced to wear dunces caps or signs confessing their mistakes, or to drink ink. They were spat at or had their heads shaved. Some were physically assaulted or in some places killed.
There are only a few bad people, bad students. I noticed them. Those people doing like that did not study hard, maybe sometimes criticized by the teacher, so they took revenge at this time.
Teachers were bourgeois intellectuals and thus inherently not to be trusted.
My female teacher, I love, she was good to me too, and also to her career. She liked to wear beauty clothes. She cared for appearance. There was a criminal accusation. She should only work hard or study hard or something like that. She should not care that much about her appearance for clothes. One boy went to her bedroom and lead so many people, and I also followed because so many people said, we want to pick him up, something like that. And she went there to cut her hair. I went there too late. The hair has been cut already. He was humiliated, and I couldn't help. I couldn't rescue her. It's shame on me. The end of 1967, I began to kind of reflection, and I found that Mao was not in control. He has no way to control the process of the Cultural Revolution.
Mao had started the Cultural Revolution to purge the party, but the Red Guards were hard to control. Anyone could be a target.
And also, I felt a little bit, if my father's background someday got exposed, what would be happen to my own life? So all things put together, and we lucky live in the southern China. There is a choice to escape to Hong Kong.
Saul fled to Hong Kong in 1968. He made friends with some American academics there who published a book based on his accounts of his time in the Red Guards. And they also helped him work out what to do next.
I studied sociology and later on went to UC Berkeley for political science. And now I settle with my family, children, grandchildren, and also my career, my business, and with more than 100 employees.
Saul now lives near San Francisco, where he runs a successful computing company. But he often looks back at his time as a Red Guard.
I'm 70 now. Now is the Red Guard generation, 70. I hope that they reflect, they regret, they re-examine. What should we prevent this kind of human tragedy happen again?
Lucy Burns reporting. Tomorrow's Witness History tells the story of the anti-British protests that erupted in Hong Kong in the late 1960s, inspired by Mao's Cultural Revolution in mainland China. There are lots of comments rolling in about today's interview with Vicky Phelan. Rachel Shirley Bency Enchel wrote, "I found myself in tears throughout the interview. I wish you all the best and pray you find a life-saving drug to sustain you and to spend longer years with your family." Christine Jameson added, "What a powerful interview. Thank you for exposing this and for helping other women and raising awareness for us all." To join the conversation, search Facebook for BBC Outlook. Bye for now.